page 706. I'm going to let you introduce yourself to give us your background and anything else you'd like to share. And I guess maybe before we do that, though, you haven't been here before, I don't think, at least.
Not in person.
Okay, yeah. So let's go around the table. Representative Levitt, would you start and we'll just introduce ourselves.
Josie Levitt, Grand Isle, Chittenden, all of Grand Isle County, a little bit of Westmont.
Mike Rice, I represent the Bennington-Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
John O'Brien, I represent Windsor Orange One, which is Royalton and my hometown Denver.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Heather Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, and West Hartford.
David Durfee, representing Shaftesbury, Sunderland, and Glastonbury.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, Williamstown, Hudson.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, Stowe.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Lindenville, Sheffield, Wheelock, Newark, and Sutton.
And for the record, once again, David Templeman, Brownington, Barton, and Westmoreland, Orleans 3.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. I also want to just thank you for all you do, which is impressive and admirable. So thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk today about birds, which is my specialty, and some of the issues that birds have with the neonicotinoid pesticides. So as you've heard, my name is Margaret Fowle, and my last name is obviously very appropriate for my profession. I am a conservation biologist with the Audubon Vermont office, which is a state office of the National Audubon Society. And I've been working for over 25 years restoring bird populations in Vermont, mostly with a specialty in agricultural habitats, but also early in my career, I did a lot of work and still do recovering peregrine falcon and bald eagle populations. So my testimony today supports the bill that you are considering. And what I thought I'd do is give you a little background on Audubon, talk a bit about birds and some of the trends that we're seeing in their populations, and then talk more specifically about the impacts of neonics on birds, at least what we know at this point. So National Audubon is a large national nonprofit. We have state offices that are throughout a number of states in the country, state and regional offices, and our main focus is bird conservation. And the national office just put together a new strategic plan that is, I'll talk more about this study, but there was recently a study that came out that talked about the decline in bird populations. And this new plan is focused on bending the curve for seeing that decline. And the yellow line there is where we hope the curve will go in the future with our work at National Audubon Society. In Vermont, we have about 10,000 active members. We have what we call chapters. We have 7 affiliated chapters, and a lot of visitors come to our center in Huntington, thousands of them. And then we have a number of partners that we work with. Just in general, this new plan is really going to focus on hemispheric conservation of birds. So we're not just thinking about where they spend the spring and summer and where they breed, but we're thinking also about where they spend their winters, how their migration patterns, and everything in between. So we have a lot of partners throughout the hemisphere. We're working on habitat conservation. We're thinking a lot about climate. We're working in the policy arena, really trying to build community from the ground up to bring all types of people along in the bird conservation world. And we are really relying on hard science to help us make decisions about what our priorities are. So a little bit about birds, which I clearly am passionate about. They are indicators of ecosystem health, and they provide essential services for us in our world. They disperse seeds, they control pests, they pollinate, they bring in ecotourism. And they also just bring us joy and wonder. We lead the nation actually in the number of residents who enjoy bird watching. It's been an estimated 39%. And Vermont, which is almost double the national average of 20%.
Staggering.
Our state's biodiversity, environmental health brings in non-residents as well and contributes hundreds of millions of dollars to our economy. Unfortunately, birds are really seeing these significant declines. So this is the report I mentioned. It's done by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's called The State of the Birds. And we're seeing these trends, downward trends in almost all groups of birds, except for birds that use wetlands. And that's thanks to, in large part, all the efforts that have been done over the years to conserve water birds and ducks and geese and swans. And in the red line on the bottom, you can see there's what they call the tipping point species. And those species are those in the US that have collectively lost 2/3 of their population in the last 50 years and are on track to lose another 50% in the next 50 years. Some of those tipping point species are considered to be priority birds for us here in Vermont. So in general, I'll go back a little bit. The declines we're seeing are eat seeds and flying insects, and those are the most pervasive declines. So, for example, grassland birds have experienced 34% population decline since 1970. Flying insect-eating bird populations have declined more than 30%, and 74% of farmland species have experienced breeding population declines. In Vermont specifically, I thought I would highlight a few of our birds that we've seen declines in from the first breeding bird atlas, which was done in the 80s, to the most recent one, which was done in the early 2000s. So one example is the chimney swift. They declined 25% between atlases. The common nighthawk declined 91% and is now a listed species in Vermont. The purple martin declined 62%. And the eastern meadowlark declined 55% and is also now a listed species in Vermont. So the habitat and diet preferences shared by some of these species suggest that agricultural pesticides, including neonics, are a major contributor to their overall declines. Recent research has directly linked neonics to farmland bird population declines, where aquatic neonic contamination was detected. And increases in neonic use specifically led to statistically significant reductions in bird biodiversity between 2008 and 2014, when they took out all the other potentially confounding factors in the research. So as you know, neonic seed coatings are the most widespread insecticide in Vermont, and that the upper estimate for neonics applied by seed treatment is more than all the other insecticides used in the state combined. And most of this is in corn. Steps to reduce the use in this cropping system would make the biggest difference in neonic use and the associated risks to pollinators and birds and other wildlife. So as someone who's spent a large part of my career working to restore birds that suffered declines from insecticides, this issue is personal for me. Peregrine falcons and bald eagles were known to disappear thanks to this insecticide DDT, which I don't know if you can read the sign, but it says powerful insecticide, harmless to humans. This is from the 1940s, probably being sprayed right on a beach. Restoration of these species has taken decades, and they were caught just in time. In Vermont, we now have a thriving population of both peregrines and eagles, but we also have thriving populations of other predatory birds that were affected by DDT. This is in large part because DDT has been banned in the United States, and we do not want to wait until we lose billions more before acting. So I will go a little bit into the effects of neonics on birds. There's a lot of studies out there, and I don't want to bore you with all the data, but I think this image is helpful to sort of see how neonics can get into our systems, either through a variety of ways. There's direct mortality. There is sort of indirect or direct sublethal, so doesn't kill something, but it can have impacts. And there's also indirect effects. So because neonics are water soluble, because they persist in the environment, because they're toxic to insects, and because they've been used increasingly over the years, they not only threaten human health, but they endangered non-target beneficial wildlife and clean water, soil, and insect and plant resources they depend on for survival. Although they are aimed at pests, neonics can impact birds, as I said, in three main ways: direct, through ingestion of seeds, significant health problems at sublethal levels, and indirectly by affecting their food supply. I'll just go in a little more detail about each of those. So in terms of direct mortality, the sensitivity to neonics varies among bird species, but there's a lot of information out there that documents that a single treated corn seed can kill a bird the size of a blue jay. Corn is the most used and widespread neonic treated seed, as I said, and 30 different species have been seen picking up treated seeds in Spain. 78% of 36 wild-caught white-crowned sparrows, which is shown in this picture, exhibited levels in their bloodstream. And other studies have suggested that predators that eat dead, carcasses of birds affected by neonics may be kind of bringing the concentration up the food chain. So as to the sublethal effects, these are just some of the things that can affect a bird, and some of the studies have shown. So even at low doses, this can affect a songbird's orientation, delay its migration, give it neurological convulsions, cause it to lose weight, and interfere with reproductive success. They can have their appetite suppressed, their body condition can be poor, they can delay their arrival to their breeding grounds, so it kind of throws off the cycle, and take a longer time during migration stopovers, which would then give them more exposure to risk and reproductive loss. So not only is the reproductive opportunity reduced, but the neonics can also have direct effects on fertilization rate, similar to what DDT did, which caused a change in eggshell thickness. It can have an effect on eggshell thickness, can cause abnormalities in development, hatching success, and the list goes on. So consistent exposure to these things can have more cumulative effects over time.
Ask you, Chris, quickly, what kind of bird is that? And
Bluebird, Eastern bluebird. Yeah, they are beautiful birds.
Representative Wilson.
When you mention seeds, we buy sunflower seeds. Is that a threat?
So, I woke up in the night thinking about that. And because I feed my birds seeds, and I do wonder, the seeds that you're feeding them are not coated.
Yeah.
But the source of the plant may have been coated. And so I want to look into that. I didn't have time this morning to do that, but
I hope not.
I did look at my bag, and it's from Quebec, which just recently passed a ban. So I'm hoping that my seeds are not taking in neonics, but definitely have thought about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in other words, the sunflower seed that you're feeding the bird came from a sunflower. That flower was on a plant that may have sprouted from a treated seed. Is that
Yes,
concern or
right.
possible concern?
Possible. Mhm. Yeah.
We haven't
I'll
heard
have to get back to you
sunflower.
once I kind of look into that a little more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that would be interesting to know. We've heard corn, soy, we've talked about, row crops, but I haven't heard about sunflowers. That'd be good to know. John?
And there's certainly a lot of corn and cornmeal in suet packs too.
True, right. Yeah, think about all of that, right? Or some of the seed mixes too.
Right.
Yep, for bird feeders. So, it's a little scary. And then I'll talk about some of the indirect effects. as I mentioned before, when the neonic chemicals leach into the water systems, they kill the larvae of non-target insects such as midges and caddisflies, which are crucial food sources for a lot of our insect-eating birds. And insect-eating birds are one of the groups that's experiencing the strongest population declines. It's already well documented that many invertebrate populations are suffering declines. I saw one study where 2/3 of invertebrate species monitored had declined by 45%. Additional losses to insect populations due to neonic exposure will further impact food availability for vulnerable birds. Aquatic macroinvertebrates are especially susceptible to neonics at low concentrations. So neonics, and to bring it home, neonics have been found in Vermont drinking water runoff from agricultural fields planted in treated corn and soy seeds, leading to into Lake Champlain from the St. Albans Bay area. And at least 10 of our Vermont's designated important bird areas, we have 17 total, are close to or receive water from highly used neonic areas in the state. So I took this quote from the American Bird Conservancy, but in general, due to these impacts, my feeling is that the use of neonic insecticides, particularly in areas where vulnerable bird species or their prey may encounter them, should be greatly reduced or eliminated. And reduction in the use of neonics and other pesticides in Vermont may help us turn that curve in the other direction. We've got vulnerable grassland, farmland, and backyard birds here in our state that are already suffering from the loss of habitat and climate change. And so for these reasons, Audubon and I strongly support the bill and hope that you move it forward. So thanks again. I'll follow up on the sunflower question, and I'm happy to answer more questions and provide you with resources if you'd like.
Representative Templeman.
Just a little curious, predator bird species. I was in Vermont in the early to mid 90s and noticed that there were not a lot of predator birds. And I imagine that was after PDT exposure for many decades.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to have come back.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I mean, that downslide of the chart looked pretty grim, but are predator birds
So,
maybe?
in general, raptors, which are predatory birds, are doing better.
Okay.
So it didn't show that well in that graphic, but it's one of the groups where it's either stabilized or slightly increasing.
And could their increase diminish other populations of birds?
Oh, good question.
And maybe that's why we're seeing.
I don't think they have that big an impact.
Okay.
But I don't have the numbers in front of me to know. But yeah, I think our predatory birds eat a variety of things, not necessarily
Not
other
just
birds. Peregrines eat birds, but they're not picky. They eat the most common ones out there, and we have lots of blue jays, and there's certain species like that are increasing. And so I imagine that there's not enough peregrines with 50 pairs in the state to really have an impact on the millions of birds that we have here.
Right. But what about the jay populations? I know that they interact negatively with songbirds, for example.
Mm-hmm. And they are increasing.
And they are on the increase.
Yep.
Very intelligent. They know all the spots to look. Could that be maybe part of the decline in bird population?
I haven't read that that's a factor. I think everybody feels like in general the science is that habitat, climate, and all those things. Climate may be helping jays, but it's those larger things that are having a bigger impact.
And what portion do you think might be insecticide related?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think the general thinking is that the major contributors right now are habitat loss, climate, which does affect insects as well.
Mhm.
Pesticides is up there with one of the major ones. There are others like bird collisions, which is maybe not such an issue for Vermont, but for cities, a lot of migratory birds hit glass during migration. and domestic cats are another big one. Mhm.
Representative O'Brien.
Could you talk about hummingbirds because they are a pollinator besides?
Yeah, sure. So we only have one hummingbird in Vermont. It's the ruby-throated, but they are pollinators. So they act like a bee. They have that long beak, like in the initial slide that I had. And they move from plant to plant. But there are really one of the only true pollinating species of birds that we have. So I kind of lump them with bees since they buzz around and, but they are migratory.
Their populations
And their
decline.
populations are, I don't know, individually, there are a lot of hummingbirds that are not doing well, and I'm not sure whether our ruby-throated is doing okay, but I could look into that.
Representative Wilson.
Two questions, or one note, we have, in our flocks, a hummingbird moth,
Oh, I love
a
them.
hawk
Yeah.
moth. It was with the little jointed thing. And, also, what would you recommend, because we've noticed this year at our bird feeder with bird seeds, a decline in birds.
Mhm.
We have chickadees, nuthatches, some blue jays, and some couple of different kinds of woodpeckers.
Yeah,
And we're not getting
you're
anything
not
else.
getting them.
No cardinals?
Well, we
They're
never
pretty
saw
far north.
cardinals are nearby, but we've never seen, rarely seen cardinals, but.
She might recommend passing in the Enoch ban, so.
So a lot of people have been saying they haven't seen that many birds this year. It's also been a very mild winter, so it's possible that birds are finding food elsewhere, but I also think even birds like chickadees are declining, and so, it's hard to tell from one year. One year you might have fewer birds, next year you might have more, so it's, you want to look at the trend over time.
Yeah.
So one blip may or may not mean something, but the more you can do to make your yard bird friendly by planting native plants, limiting trimming and, pruning. So there's a lot of seeds out there in the wintertime that are important for birds. And the more we cut down, even our perennial gardens, keeping those uncut during the winter. The native plants are really key, and thinking about which ones bloom early and which ones bloom late. And so having something that blooms throughout the season, because the more insects you attract, the more birds you attract, and the more variety of seeds and things that you attract, the more birds you attract.
I love the stuff we learned in here, but we learned about nutation, these little water droplets. Is that a source of water for birds too?
What's that? Vegetation?
Yeah.
What?
Nutation?
It's like the respirating of plants.
Transpiration is.
Oh,
the-
transpiration, really.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know a lot of birds get their water from their food, and so I don't know how much they're getting just from the air. So most raptors, like hawks and owls, get the water they need from their food, and they don't actually go drink water necessarily. They don't need to. They do, but they don't have to.
Like the little dewdrops on plants?
Yeah, so it's possible that some are getting water that way. There are different insect eating styles. So some birds do what we call glean, and they take the insect off the leaf or the stem. Some catch them in the air. And so I imagine that the ones that glean actually pick up water off the insects that have been on there.
I know your specialty is birds. So if this is a question that you're not sure you know the answer to, on the graphic that
Want to go back?
there, on page 9 or slide number 9, I think, showing the birds and the
This one?
yes, that one. Yeah. So we've in the left-hand corner where it talks about injecting into trees. We talked about seeds and a little bit about spraying, and I think we may have a reference at some point to direct into trees, but we haven't really talked about that. Is that anything you can speak to, why that's done and what the impact might be on birds?
So I don't know a lot about spraying, but I do know that anything that's killing a food source for birds is a negative. And a lot of, at least with DDT, when the chemical got into the system and the insects, so say it went into the waterway, it got into an insect and the fish ate the insect and then an eagle ate the fish. Every time it moves up the food chain, it becomes more concentrated. I don't know if that's true for neonics, if it's called bioaccumulation, if they move up the food chain and become more concentrated, but my sense would be that if a tree was being sprayed, mainly the main thing would be that it's killing insects, but at the same time, it's possible that if things leach into the waterways and the systems, then they become more concentrated as they move up. And that's why we saw with DET, think of the peregrines, the eagles, the osprey, everything at the top of the food chain was more affected by it than other lower down species.
Any other questions? Well, we have an expert here on birds, backyard birds. Right, well, thank you very much for coming in. Share your testimony.
Yeah, I could have
Yeah,
some
go
more.
ahead.
Just
Yeah.
IPM, that's integrated pest management, is Audubon working with, whether it's Quebec and Ontario or even in this country, using birds as a way to combat insects?
We're learning more and more about that. Some birds are considered pests and some are not. And so we're sort of trying to learn from farmers, like what works for them and which birds are causing problems, and then trying to find the balance there. But we don't have like a set of best management practices yet. Kind of things that we're looking into and hoping that, we can think, I do think that, and I do know from talking with farmers that swallows, for example, really keep the bugs off their animals. And so the more we can do to bring these birds that aren't considered to be pests in to help control some of the pests in a natural way, the better I think we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you work out of Huntington?
I do.
And as a peregrine falcon expert, the Bolton Cliffs and up
Up in
in,
Bolton Notch, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then up in Smuggler's Notch, they're sort of out of bounds for rock climbers and certain nesting or breeding times. Have you found that those populations have, as you say, started that bending the curve? Are we seeing
Yeah.
population growth in your?
In my time, I started working with peregrines in 97, and back then we had, I think, 19 pairs of peregrines that we knew about in the state. We don't count all of them anymore. So we think we have at least 60.
So you bent the curve.
So we bent the curve, yeah. But it's been a long time.
I know.
Big effort, reintroduction effort started the process. And so it was definitely, they were gone from the Northeast. So they had to be reintroduced in order to bring them back.
Is that true of bald eagles as well?
Bald eagles were gone from all the northeastern states, I think, except Maine and New York. And there were reintroduction efforts in a lot of those states. And we actually did our own in early 2000s, but it was we were the last state to get a nesting pair of bald eagles. So that helped boost the process. It was something that Senator Jeffords had sponsored, and we now have more than 45 nesting pairs in the state. So they're now off our state lists, both of them.
Yeah, because 40 nesting pairs would be enough to be no longer considered at risk.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't walked away. We're still monitoring. We've got a huge community science effort that goes out and keeps tabs on them. And, we don't want to lose them again. So we want to keep an eye on at least some portion of the population to get a sense of how they're doing. Yeah.
Anything else? Good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, I think we can we can end the meeting, Sidonia, and we're gonna be on the